This is the second generation Crane Bedfordshire urinal, a urinal that's been around since at least the late 1950s or early 1960s and was made up until at least circa 1967. This is probably the most forgettable version of the Crane Bedfordshire urinal. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but let's be honest here, have you really seen many of these at all? In fact, I don't think many of you even know about this generation. So you have the first generation Crane Bedfordshire, which has been made since the early 1900s and has a classical design. Despite that, it was pretty rare. This, on the other hand, is a lot more rare though, considering it was made for a less number of years compared to the first gen. But let's take a look at it and see what it has to offer. So already, overall design, I don't really have much to say about it. It is very plain. Like, very plain. Like, you can definitely tell some vintage aspects like these two bolt holes right up here, but outside of that, it's kind of boring looking, I'll be honest with you. So right up here is the hole pattern, which is for the main drain. As you can see, it has some at the top, which drains down into the middle part right here. Now this thing does have rim jets right up here, and even rim jets on the side, right around in the rim, which is pretty nice. Let's have a look at a flush. It's a pretty standard flush, but the front rim jets definitely do help out a little bit to make the flush a little bit more exciting for what it is. But generally speaking, the flush really isn't all that special. It's a pretty standard straight down flush. Functionality wise, it's perfectly fine. It's a pretty standard P-trap washout urinal that works as intended. Now it doesn't have any overflow protection, but it does have a pretty deep rim for what it is. And it also has some overflow rims as well right up here, which drain down to the center, which is a pretty nice touch. Let's talk about the rinse. To be honest with you, it could have been a lot better. As you can see here, it actually misses this center part right here entirely, which is not a great look, honestly. And even what little is touching it, it's barely enough to even cover most of the center, which is a little bit concerning and probably a weird design flaw. So the rinse itself, not too great, I'll be honest, but it does cover the front area pretty well. But the back rim, on the other hand, is an entirely different story. And that's all there is to say about the second generation Crane Bedfordshire urinal. A pretty forgettable urinal with some strange design flaws. Now, while this is a pretty cool urinal for what it is, especially the fact that it has front rim jets, there are definitely some aspects that definitely do drag it down a little bit more compared to some other urinals similar to this. But let's see how it goes into the grading scale. Let's grade it. If there's anything to say about the design of the second generation Crane Bedfordshire, is that it's so bland. I mean, yeah, sure, there are some vintage aspects here or there, but outside of that, it's just a circle. It's so boring. That's why I'm only giving this thing a 4 in design. For a standard washout flush, it actually isn't too bad. I definitely think that the flush is slightly improved due to the front rim jets giving it some more power. Outside the excitement in the front jets, the flush is kind of standard, but I give it a 6. The bow rinse at the front of the rim is actually pretty good, but what about the back rim? Not so good. Honestly, the rinse on the back is pretty pathetic, and this mostly has to deal with the rim jets themselves. There's only a few of them, and they're so far spaced out, and regardless of the pressure on this one being higher, the bow rinse is just kind of pitiful on the back rim. I mean, yes, the front rim actually has pretty good rinse, but the back rim is just pathetic, honestly. Due to the split, I have to give this thing a 5. This thing seems like a pretty fine washout urinal, minus the fact that the back rinse is kind of pitiful. If it wasn't for that, I'd actually give this thing a 7, but due to the rinsing problems in the back room, the effectiveness does drop down a little bit, and I have to give it a 6. Yeah, there's a reason this urinal is pretty forgettable, and it's not just because of the fact that this thing was just made for a short period of time compared to the first generation Crane Bedfordshire, which, fun fact, is also pretty rare, but there's just nothing of interest here. The design is pretty bland, the rinse is pretty half-baked, and minus the flush being improved due to the front rim jets, there really is nothing to offer here. If they redesigned this urinal to be a little bit better and have a few more rim jets or, spread out the rim jets better, this urinal would not be bad at all. Yeah, it still looked bland, but at least the effectiveness and the rim rinse would go up a little bit. And because of that, it's pretty easy to see why this urinal is so forgettable. And it's not due to the longevity of this urinal. It's just not a very good executed urinal. This urinal definitely could have been a lot better. And because of that, it gets a 5. The final score of the second generation Crane Bedfordshire urinal is a 26 out of 50, which ends up being a 52 out of 100 overall. There's a good reason this urinal is pretty forgettable, and it's not for the reasons you think. The execution was kind of poor on Crane's part, and the urinal ends up being a lot more lackluster than you might expect it to. Sure, there was potential, but Crane missed the mark here.